guys, it's Crystal. I hope you guys are all doing well and that you've had a good week so far. Summer's quickly winding down, so hopefully you're out there doing the stuff you love most. If you're new to this channel, like I said, my name is Crystal and I do Canadian true crime or true crime with a Canadian twist. From time to time, I do international crimes as well, ones that have been recommended to me, ones that I find interesting. Sometimes I do it to highlight the differences in the judicial system. So if you guys do want to get behind that, hopefully you guys will like these videos. Hopefully you'll subscribe, ring the notification bell, and leave me some comments. You guys know I always say it, particularly about this case. If you guys do choose to leave some comments though, please no hate. There's enough hate out in the world and we don't need to add to this. We're just here to talk about theories and sometimes question strange stuff that maybe was in the case that I didn't think about or that I didn't go into as much. You guys know I'm already long-winded enough, so sometimes I have to cut it down. And if you guys are returning subscribers, you guys know already how much I love you and how thankful I am that you guys seem to like watching me. I'm so beyond thankful, guys, that you guys chose me to be an audience to. I know my videos are long, so thank you for that. And like I said, these videos are for entertainment or educational purposes only. Just that'll make YouTube happy. I don't know if you guys noticed or not, but I'm using different lighting as well. I used to just use the lights on, but I've decided to use some natural lighting. So let me know if you guys think it's too dark or not. So today, if you guys will notice my shirt, once again, it's a Degrassi shirt, so y'all know that we're going back to Toronto. Birthplace of Drake. It's Aubrey Graham, guys. I love him so much. Hopefully you guys do too. True Canadian. But you guys already know how much I love Degrassi as well, so anytime I get to pull out the shirts makes me happy. So today we're talking about a historical crime, actually, guys. It's really historical. I'm not going to leave a phone number at the end of it. The crime is, if this person was still alive today, he'd be like 156 years old or 153 years old. So I'm not going to leave a phone number, but I guess if you guys do have any information, just contact the Toronto police or the RCMP. Today's case is the case of Ambrose Small. And I'm not surprised if you haven't heard of it, but I'm also not surprised if you have. I first learned about this when I was in university years ago. I used to read these big true crime compendiums, just like assorted stories written by a guy named Max Haynes. You guys might know who he is. He's actually really famous. He used to write a crime column in Antigonish, I think, in Nova Scotia. He's a very famous Canadian. He's really great at writing true crime, and these are shorter stories, so they were easier to read. This case intrigued me then, and I knew at some point in time I wanted to cover it, so today is going to be that day. It's a missing persons case. You guys know from time to time I like to do them. I'm always hoping that they'll be shorter, but there are so many avenues in this case that I didn't know about. It's pretty shocking. So Ambrose Small was born sometime in early 1866. One of the dates I had was January 11th, but nobody really seemed to agree on it. So we're just going to say sometime in early 1866. He would have been born in Bradford, Upper Canada at that point in time. If you guys remember, we did not enter into Confederacy until the next year, 1867, and that's when that's when Ontario, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Quebec all joined the Confederacy. We were the first 4 provinces to do so. So at the time when Ambrose was born, it was still Upper Canada. His dad's name was Daniel. His mom's name was Ellen. I know he does have at least 2 sisters. I'm not quite sure if there were any other siblings. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot on his childhood, guys. I know that they weren't a wealthy family, and his dad seemed to work in bars, usually managing them. Now, sometime between 1875 and 1880, there was no exact date, the family relocated to Toronto. Toronto is about 60 kilometers away from Brantford, so the family relocated there. Ostensibly, this was for Daniel to have a job. He started working at the Toronto, sorry, just give me one second, guys. He started working at the Grand Hotel in Toronto. So at that point in time, the Grand Hotel was one of the more prestigious hotels. And he was either the manager or the proprietor. Once again, like I said, it was very hard to find correct information about this. especially in Wikipedia. You guys know how I feel about Wikipedia when it comes to Canadian stories. American stories they do fine with, but with Canadian stories, it's a little bit more sordid. So I looked at a Maclean's magazine article actually from 1951 for this. Maclean's magazines are really hardcore into it, so it's usually a better source. And I also looked at the Canadian Encyclopedia and a couple other articles as well. And they seem to all say that Daniel was either the manager or the proprietor of the Grand Hotel in Toronto. Now this would be on Yonge Street, guys. And the family was not wealthy, but Daniel was a very hardworking man. And he had a very, let's just say he was very work-oriented. He seems to have passed this on to his son Ambrose, as well as ambition. Ambrose was a very hardworking and ambitious guy. He just didn't always go about it in such great means, let's just say. But he was not afraid to work for his money. And I gotta tell you guys, if there was one thing that Ambrose Small loved in life, it was money. So in 1880, when he was about 18, give or take 18, 19, he actually started working next door at the Grand Opera House in Toronto. So next door to the place that his dad was managing. He started off small. He was an usher. He was a bartender. He also helped set up some of the production for it. And he became a bookie at this point in time. You guys know it was illegal, I think it still is in most areas, to take bets on certain sporting ventures, and this was something that Ambrose did. He took bets specifically on horse racing. He seems to have really enjoyed horse racing in his life, and he was doing fairly well. Now he also developed a vast love of gambling too, and we're talking high stakes gambling. So you know when they have like the high stakes poker tournaments that the celebrities are all in, okay, if that was a horse racing thing, Ambrose Small would have been there. And we're not talking small bets. He liked doing big bets. So by 1889 he had actually worked his way up to become the treasurer of the Grand Hotel in Toronto. In 1889, though, he had some type of quarrel. They just described it as a quarrel, some type of fight with the then manager of the Opera House, and his name was Oliver B. Shepherd. They had some type of quarrel, and as such, Ambrose actually left his job at the Opera House, the Grand Opera House, and moved on to the Toronto Opera House. And that's where he started learning more about the business from. He never forgot about the Grand Opera House, and he never forgot about Shepherd either. But it would be a little while until those names kind of come back into the story. So the Toronto Opera House was actually a place that showed really popular vaudeville acts of the time, and they also produced melodramas. It was a fairly popular place. Lots of people like to go. This was before the invention of motion pictures in reality. Kind of like in their infancy. There'd be some small ones, but at this point in time, there was no movie industry like we know it. So this was a way for people to have entertainment, particularly wealthy people. And this was the place where Ambrose learned all the ins and outs of the opera business, of show business, if you will, at that point in time. He learned everything about it that he possibly could. These acts were actually, it's very hard, guys, and it does sound really mob-esque, but these acts, these contracts were actually controlled by syndicates in New York and in Montreal. In order for performers to be able to come to Canada, they had to go through one of these two sources in order to be able to get a contract to come here. So it was a pretty brisk business, let's just say. So he actually, where Ambrose worked his way up through the ranks at the Toronto Opera House, and he eventually became manager of the Toronto Opera House. He also learned at this point to be very intuitive to what the public enjoyed. He was very intuitive on what plays or melodramas or what vaudeville acts did the best. This, of course, was a boon for him, right, guys? The better the act does, the more money that's going to come in. So he was very in tune with the public tastes, and he remained this way all throughout his career with the opera houses. Around 1888, so we're going to step back a little bit, Ambrose's mother died, and his father remarried in 1891. She was the daughter of a wealthy beer baron. I've always wanted to say that right. Like in The Simpsons, remember the beer baron one when Homer was a Simpson? Every time I think of beer baron, I can't help but think of that episode. But this guy was a really wealthy beer baron, and his name was Ignatius Corman. He also apparently had either interests or shares in the Toronto Hotel, the Grand Toronto Hotel, which is probably how the daughter and the father met. Money was now really no object to the family because of the added wealth from the Corman name, and it fueled Ambrose's passion even more for money. It was like the man could never have enough money. He always wanted to earn more. And he was really hardworking. Like I said, he was not afraid to earn the money. He was also not afraid to use unscrupulous tactics to earn the money, but we'll get into that. So on November 6th of 1902, on or about that day, guys, there was no real consensus on it. Ambrose was 36 at this point in time, and he married his stepmother's younger sister, Teresa Corman. So, yeah, I know. So, I know they're step siblings, or I know like that was his stepmother, but his step aunt is now his wife, and she's now not only her sister's sister, but also her daughter-in-law. Just wow. So anyway, they got married. Now, this marriage was not out of love. It was more of a friendship / business arrangement. The only thing that Teresa and Ambrose had in common was their love of money. And it just so happened that in 1902, at some point in time, Teresa's mother had also passed on, and she was wealthy herself as well. And her will was in probate at the time that the two got married. So that was going to further compound their fortunes, if you will. So it does seem like it was more of a friendship, a business acquaintanceship type relationship than anything about love. Apparently they were complete opposites, though Teresa was described as buxom. I just wanted to add that in, it was funny. She was a really pious woman. She was very religious. She was a strict Roman Catholic, and she liked to do a lot of charity work for the Roman Catholic Church. Ambrose, on the other hand, was a hard partier. He was a bit of a hard partier. He loved his gambling. He loved taking illegal bets. He also loved to allegedly fix the horse races so they would come out in his and his business associates' outcomes. He was also very much a womanizer. Ambrose Small loved the ladies, and the ladies apparently loved him too. One of his things that he would do was, if he liked a girl that was in the chorus, not the actual vaudeville show or melodrama, but one of the chorus girls who worked in the hotel, he would send them chocolates. Apparently this was a thing, just to show how much he liked them, and he had many trysts. Teresa actually knew about these. This is why I'm saying it wasn't so much for love, and it didn't seem like it mattered much to her as long as her lifestyle and her cash flow wasn't interrupted in any way. In 1884, while working at the Grand Opera Hotel, sorry guys, I went back in time. Sorry, guys. So Teresa's mother, like I said, had died, and eventually the will went through probate and she inherited her sum. So sometime in 1903, she actually helped Ambrose buy back his beloved, I shouldn't say buy his beloved Grand Opera Hotel, or sorry, his beloved Grand Opera Theater. I'm having problems again, guys, sorry. She helped him buy that back. So now he is the owner of the theater. And of course, he's very, very happy about this. But he also knows a lot about the business. So he knows what it would take for the business to succeed and to become more preeminent than it already was. At this point, Ambrose had what was called a secret chamber built underneath the opera house. And this was a place for him to bring his ladies to. Apparently it had a full bar. It had a picture of a naked lady that was painted and put up in there, and it also had what was described as an opulent bed for him to entertain his ladies in, which once again Teresa did know about and didn't seem to care about as long as it didn't affect her own financial premise, I guess. She did claim, though, Teresa did claim that her husband was devoted to her in every other aspect of life, except sexually, I guess. Because Ambrose was a great businessman, and he really was, guys. He knew the ins and outs of business, and he knew how to fix things in his favor. He really was a good businessman. He had a lot of ambitions. He had lax scruples. He wasn't afraid of hard work, so he was very much a good businessman. He was able to sniff out all the best deals around town and to get them for less money than perhaps other people would have been able to. But he was always, always, always wanting more. This is one thing about him. I don't know if I could particularly describe him as greedy, because he was very generous to Teresa and other people. We'll get into that, certain other people. But he didn't always do things legally, let's just say. At some point in time, he went into a business partnership with a man named Clark J. Whitney. He was a Detroit theater mogul. So this gave them even further control over theaters, both of them, him and Mr. Whitney. Now, Mr. Whitney controlled a big part of the Ontario theater chains, so this helped Ambrose out a lot more, but it also let him have some control over theater chains in the States. In 1902, Mr. Whitney died, so as such, this gave sole control to Ambrose Small. He had sole control over all of the theaters that Mr. Whitney had once owned, that they had both owned in business ships as well. So he consolidated all of this and started buying and leasing up other theaters. Eventually, he bought and or leased theaters in Peterborough, Hamilton, St. Thomas, London, Kingston, and other places. These were big name places that a lot of people went to and a lot of people viewed from. As an act of revenge, he waited a couple years, but of course, as an act of revenge on Mr. Shepherd, he fired him in 1906. So he's no longer the manager. And of course, he could do this. I don't know why he waited the 3 years, but he did. That year, in 1906, he also became the president of the Canadian Theatrical Managers Association. He became president of that. So he's pretty well known. People know who he is in Toronto for sure. So not only did Ambrose own or lease a lot of the theaters in and around Canada and some of the States, he also controlled all the booking contracts at that point in time for 62 other theaters that were mostly in Ontario. So he's controlling that. He somehow wrested control, I'm not completely sure how he did this, from New York at that point in time. This is why I say it kind of sounds mob-esque. I know we're dealing with show business things, but it kind of sounds a little mob-esque when you get into it. And there's reasons I'm saying that. We'll get into that later too. So he was responsible, at this point in time, Ambrose Small was now responsible for most of the major bookings in Canada, some in the States, but most of the major bookings in Canada. And of course, he made more money out of this too. This is how he amassed his fortune, guys. And he was worth quite a bit of money at this point in time. And of course, he's still fixing horse races. It's possible he could have still been a bookie. I'm not sure. They never said anything more about that, so I'm not sure at this point in time. But he was legitimately a millionaire through whatever means. So, like I said before, Teresa and Ambrose did not have a lot in common, but they did share that love of money. And they seemed happy enough together. I know he was a womanizer, but it didn't seem to matter to her. There were some rumors that she had a lover. It doesn't seem likely, knowing how staunchly Catholic she was, but who can say for sure? They did eventually buy a mansion in the wealthy Rosedale district in Toronto. I'm not sure if that's still a wealthy place or not. I did try to find out. But at that point in time, Rosedale was the epicenter of where all the wealthiest people lived in Toronto. So they bought a mansion there and they were living the good life. It's not like they didn't spend money on themselves. And Ambrose was known to be fairly generous with Teresa, as well as his two spinster sisters. When his father died, because they were unmarried, Ambrose had to support them if you will, financially, emotionally, everything else. He did seem to love his sisters, guys. It doesn't seem like this was a burden on him. It does seem like he loved his sisters, and he was a hero to them of sorts because he did support them financially in whatever way they were accustomed to. So Ambrose's wife, Teresa, would often take shopping trips, specifically in Europe. It doesn't seem like they really vacation together. She would vacation in Europe so she could shop. He would vacation in the States so he could visit off all of the various racetracks and fix the races, but also gamble to his heart's content. He was a very big gambler, guys. He really loved to gamble. And he wasn't afraid to spread out his money so long as it would ensure him better returns on it. So he wasn't afraid to spend a little money to make more money. Apparently, now this is true, Ambrose and Teresa never had any children. It could have been due to the age they were when they got married. I'm not sure how old Teresa was when they got married, but I know Ambrose was 36, and they were really ambitious and enjoyed money and the finer things in life. Maybe children just didn't fall into the mix for them. But it's also rumored that they slept in separate beds in the mansion, so it's possible they never really shared a bed to begin with. Now, there were people out there who did think of Ambrose as a good guy. Some people found him very generous. Like I said, his sisters did. Teresa did. She said he was devoted to him and everything. But, of course, a sexual relationship. She said he was a good husband. He just would slip and fall into temptation from time to time. A lot of time to times, let's just say. But she did say he was a good husband to her. He did have employees that were loyal to him. Not very many, but he did have some that did see him as a kind and generous man. And Teresa, of course, saw him that way. And, of course, his spinster sisters saw him as a kind and generous man. But the people that saw him that way were few and far in between. He had a lot more enemies than friends, let's just say. Many of the people that he did business with felt that he was a liar, a swindler, a bet welcher, apparently we're going to get into that in a second, and a slanderer. He would call them names if he didn't get his way. And he had more power and more wealth than his business associates did at that time, so more people would believe him and what he said than the business partners, let's just say. He reportedly did not care who he cheated and did not care if he screwed somebody over. Quote, he allegedly enjoyed finding means of cheating associates, end quote. That was one of his things. Because he doesn't like to part with money, right, guys? He wants to make sure he has more returns than anything else. He didn't care if he cheated you. It was business. So he would put clauses in business contracts called Joker's clauses. So basically these, I really had to read about it. So basically these are ways to make sure a buyer never has to pay what is owed or the full amount or sometimes in certain cases anything at all. And he'd often laugh about these business clauses, these Joker's clauses with other associates. Or a seller can claim the item as lost and still have the money for it. Let's give an example of, okay, I will send you the item after I already have the cash. Oh, I have the cash, but the item got lost in the mail. My bad. Well, sorry about your luck. You know, a lot of businesses have that. No refunds, right? So that could be a Joker's clause. In some cases, they never had the materials to begin with. They just did this as a way to get money. And this is particularly true of people who were new to business and maybe didn't know how to read a contract very well. It also could be that the buyer would say that they could only give the cash once it's been verified by a certain bank. Now, at that point in time, there were many banks and not all of them were well established. So sometimes the banks either didn't have the money to be able to go through with this or they didn't exist. And as such, the buyer, well, the seller would not get their goods, but the buyer would keep the money. He loved doing this, guys. And I got to tell you, if anybody sniffed him out, if anybody was on to him about his shady business deals or his shady business practices, he would throw one of his employees under the bus and make them take the blame for it. And he'd just feign complete innocence. So not really a good guy. Apparently, these Joker's clauses are subtle word changes in the contract that, quote, seem insignificant, end quote, to the rest of the contract, but actually alter the document significantly. So there were also the people he screwed over by fixing the horse races and by the bookie bets, things of that nature. So he didn't have a whole ton of friends. There were also the mistresses that he probably screwed over by taking various other lovers. And, you know, those New York syndicates and the Montreal syndicates that weren't really happy with the fact that he had wrested control of acting and entertainment contracts from them. So he didn't have a whole lot of friends, but he was known as a guy who minded his own business. He didn't like to get into other people's dealings. By 1919, the theater business was going into decline. This makes sense, guys, because at this point in time, motion pictures were becoming hugely popular. It's shortly before talkies were invented, but people enjoyed going to actual movie houses to see movies as opposed to vaudeville acts and plays. Of course, they were still, you know, popular enough, but their heyday had kind of gone by the wayside. Because Ambrose knew all the ins and outs and he knew what public tastes were like, he decided this would be a good time for him to sell his business chain. That's right, you heard it from me. He decided to sell all of his theaters in 1919. He was selling them to a business called Trans-Canada Theaters, and this was based out of Montreal. Now, the business sale was going to be $1.7 million. That's the price that was agreed on. And in today's money, guys, that would be well over $15 million. So he was making quite a lot of money. You know, in 1919, being a millionaire, that was a big deal. So ostensibly, he decided it was time to do this. What was going to happen was Ambrose was going to get $1 million when they signed the contract, and then he would receive the other $700,000 through installments. So according to an employee who Ambrose worked for, but they knew each other fairly well, he said that Ambrose told him that he'd like to just buy one theater and give all of his employees a job there so that way they would still be making money. Sounds generous, right? But who can say for sure if it was true or not? He may have just been saying that to appease the employee. Certain employees were also, I don't want to say sold, but were also, their contracts, if you will, were also given over to Montreal too. I don't know if it was all of the employees or just certain ones, but I know certain ones were also contracted to go over to Trans-Canada. To be in business with Trans-Canada, I should say. So on December 2nd, 1919, Ambrose, Teresa, and their attorney, E.W.M. Flock, who also did happen to be a good friend of theirs as well, signed the sale document at the legal offices of Alan Alsworth, and this was at 65 Yonge Street. A representative, of course, from Trans-Canada was there, and he handed Ambrose that $1 million check. Remember, he's getting the first $1 million at the signing. Ambrose then gave the check to Teresa to deposit. He must have had some other business to do. And she deposited the check at 11:45 a.m. At the Dominion Bank. This was before it became the Toronto Dominion Bank. But at the Dominion Bank branch on Yonge Street. So they know for sure she deposited the money. The three of them reconvened after that. Sorry, guys. At the King Edward Hotel. So the King Edward Hotel was one of the fanciest hotels in Toronto. So the three of them reconvened there to have lunch. And they did have lunch for a little while, of course. So people did see them all together in the afternoon. Now, I do also want to say that it took weeks for the news of the theater sale to go into the papers. So it's not like it was hidden, but a lot of people didn't know at that point in time that he wanted to get out of the business. It almost sounds like insider trading, like he had a tip for that, but it wasn't, of course. It just almost sounds like it. So Flock may have been with I'm going to guess he was with Ambrose the whole time, and it was just Teresa that went down to the bank to cash the check, and she deposited the whole thing, guys. She didn't take any money from it. And then they went to lunch at the hotel. So Ambrose then took Teresa to one of her various charities so that she could make a donation to them, most likely in time for Christmas time. And sources say that this was the St. Vincent de Paul Catholic Orphanage on Bond Street. Teresa then says that she and Ambrose parted ways at this point in time. She must have had another way of getting home because Ambrose still had some business to take care of at the Opera House, and he and Flock actually met back up at the Opera House. Now, he told Teresa he would be home by 6 p.m. and she said, okay. At some point in time, they said around 5 o'clock, Teresa made her way back home, and she then called her sister. I'm going to guess this was the sister mother-in-law, and told her that she and Ambrose planned to travel the world in the coming year. Ambrose also had went shopping before going back to the Opera House. He bought a Cadillac for himself. He bought a bunch of jewelry for Teresa, and he also bought her a new fur coat. So like I said, he was generous with her. These could have been Christmas presents, ostensibly. So like I said, he then went back to the hotel, and the two of them did whatever business they had to take care of at that point in time. Ambrose did ask Mr. Flock to come back home and have dinner with he and Teresa, but Mr. Flock declined because he had a train to catch and he had to leave. So at 5:30, he left. He is ostensibly the last verifiable person who ever saw Ambrose Small again. So Ambrose was described as being between 5'6" and 5'7". He wasn't a very big man. He had a really big mustache that they used to call a walrus mustache at that point in time. And he had a reddish complexion. He was also hollow-cheeked, guys. He was fairly slender as well. They said he weighed between 135 and 140 pounds. So he's a fairly tiny man. He's noticeable, let's just say. He had brown hair, and his mustache was apparently streaked with gray. He was also described as being very quick in his movements. So he was it was almost like he was nervous. He does things like I do. I'm very fast in my movements to some extent as well. And he would have been about 53 years old at this point in time, guys. They said that he was, quote, noisy and bluff when happy, and bleak and watchful when not, end quote. He was last seen wearing a dark-colored tweed suit and a dark-colored overcoat as well. It had a velvet collar, and he was wearing what is known as a, quote, soft felt hat. And like I said, he would have been about 53 years of age. So when Ambrose didn't come home by 6 p.m., Teresa didn't get super worried. The reason being is that Ambrose was well known for taking either business trips or pleasure trips on a whim. He wouldn't necessarily let anybody know he was going on these trips. He'd probably, I guess, write to them, wire them, or telegraph them later. But if he needed to go on a business trip, he didn't really tell people he was going. So Teresa wasn't necessarily worried about him. She did call his business associates, and they also reminded her that he was known to travel without notice. So she wasn't super concerned. She started to think that he was more than likely entertaining one of his designing women, one of his mistresses. So she wasn't super concerned, according to her, at this point in time. Police were actually not notified of Ambrose's disappearance for approximately 2 weeks. It was December 16th, so 2 weeks exactly, guys, of 1919, when James Cowan, who was actually the manager of the Grand Opera House, called police and reported Ambrose as missing. Of course, this is really bad luck and bad news for the police. Evidence in 2 weeks can go missing. You guys know that. Evidence can go missing within 24 hours. Clues to his disappearance could dry up by that point in time. It's very bizarre that they waited 2 weeks, but nevertheless, they did wait 2 weeks. Now, no one knows for sure if Mr. Cowan reported Ambrose missing of his own volition, or if he did this at the behest of Teresa. What is known is that Teresa didn't report it herself because she didn't want it to be a scandal. Remember, she thinks that he's with another woman, and even though he's a known womanizer, it would be scandalous at that point in time, and she didn't want to throw her husband under the bus. Just give me a second, guys. I'm going to show you a picture of Ambrose right now. So this is the man we're talking about. You can see his big old mustache there. I love these old black and white photos because they always have really haunting eyes. Everybody looks like they're super surprised. That right there is Teresa, guys, just to give you guys some notification of this. So Austin Mitchell was actually the detective who headed up the case. At one point in time, he was the only detective on the case. And it was made sure by him that Ambrose picture and missing poster was actually distributed all across Canada and all across the United States. It was in all of the papers. He's pretty well known in the United States. He's well known in Canada, and he's a very distinctive looking man, guys. So they figured this was their best bet, just in case he somehow had ended up in the States and he was on a longer business trip than what he maybe thought he would be, or if he was out with one of his ladies and he was spending a longer amount of time. No one heard anything, though. Mitchell noted that Ambrose had not packed any of his clothes. He hadn't taken a suitcase with him. Of course, who's to say he didn't hide one somewhere that no one knew about? Maybe the secret chamber. I don't think Teresa ever went there. I'm just saying. He also noted that sources had told him that Ambrose had a very small amount of cash on him, not very much at all. Of course, once again, who's to say that Ambrose wasn't hiding cash in certain places? I don't think everybody knew. If he won big at a gambling bet or at one of the horse races, he wouldn't necessarily have to tell anybody, nor would he necessarily have to deposit that money. I think this is only money that Teresa knew about or other associates knew about. They also went and checked known hotels, known places he would travel to, and no one has a record of him signing in or out anywhere. There's no record of him booking any type of hotel accommodations or any type of travel accommodations to get there by check. There's no record of that. He could have paid in cash, but there is no record of anything like that. So newspapers at the time were crazy for this story. You got a missing millionaire, guys. He's an unscrupulous man. He's known to gamble. He's known to womanize. He's known to fix things. This was a salacious story. And you guys also remember that newspapers at that time were not known to be 100% truthful. If they had the best headline of the day, they'd make the money. So it didn't matter if the headline was necessarily true or not. But a lot of people started speculating on what could have happened to Ambrose at this point in time, particularly because he had so much money. And there were a lot of rumors and stories going around as well. But in a way, it was good because it did get his face out there more and more and more, right? Early on in the oh God, the newspaper loved this story. It was in the papers for a very, very long time. So early on in the investigation, two newsboys named Nat and Louis Savain reported that they saw Ambrose Small walking east on Adelaide Street, which is apparently about 22 minutes from Yonge Street. But they saw him walking east on Adelaide Street, where Flock had left, or at about 5:30, which doesn't really make sense because Mr. Flock left at 5:30. Well, they said it was after 5:30, so I guess maybe he'd have to be walking really fast. They said he had quick movements, but anyway, these two boys reported that. And Fred Lamb, who was actually the new owner of the Grand Hotel, actually reported that Ambrose had come into the hotel and stayed there until about 7 p.m. Now, police did believe their stories. They were being very truthful, but they felt that it did not happen on the night of the 2nd. They thought that the 3 of them were confused and that these events had actually taken place the night of the 1st. So they were discounted. Alfred Elson, oh God, don't say that too many times fast, who was a building caretaker on Bloor Street, said that on the night of December 2nd, he saw 4 men bury, quote, something heavy, end quote, in the Rosedale Ravine dump. Apparently there was either an actual dump or a dumping site there. And if you guys do remember, the couple did live in Rosedale. He claims he saw 4 men burying this something heavy. George J. Susie, who was an engineer with a publishing company, said he saw Ambrose, quote, held in a car speeding north on Yonge Street, end quote, on December 2nd. Now, police apparently did look into both tips, and they did somewhat dig up part of the dump, but I don't think they dug very deep, and I don't think they dug up the whole thing. And they never found anything about the speeding car tip either. Sightings of Ambrose were starting to pop up all over the place. People said they saw him in Boston. They saw him in Minneapolis. People said that he was a man that was suffering amnesia, who identified himself by the name of Jim Doty. Remember that name. He apparently he was able to pick himself out of a picture, but he claimed to have been in an automobile accident, or people knew he had been in an automobile accident, and he was calling himself a different name. Regardless, it wasn't him. These tips weren't taken seriously. They were investigated, but nothing turned up, let's just say. So Teresa had initially put out a $500 reward for Ambrose. Sorry, guys. But she actually then upped the reward to about $50,000. That would be more than $700,000 in today's money. And that was if he was found alive. If his body was found, if he was found dead, she offered a $15,000 reward, which would be well over $200,000 in today's money. This was a thing they did back then, I guess, to have closure and something to bury. So the story at this point in time, with this huge reward, now reached international proportions. A magician claimed that in April of 1920, I believe it was actually April 18th, of 1920, he saw Ambrose Small in Juarez, Juarez, Mexico, playing roulette. He swore he saw him down there. At this point in time, of course, self-proclaimed mediums and psychics were coming out of the woodwork saying they were hearing from Ambrose's ghost and that he was buried underneath the Opera House, or that he was in the walls of a certain building, or that he was in an incinerator in Montreal. Various stories like that started to crop up. And they actually also approached Sir Arthur Conan Doyle to look into this case. So you guys know Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote these Sherlock Holmes mysteries, but Sherlock Holmes mysteries, I should say, but he actually was like an amateur sleuth as well. He was involved in investigating a couple cold cases in England, ostensibly. I think it may have been other places in Europe. But anyways, he looked into these cold cases, and he actually was able to get the convictions overturned because they were wrongfully convicted. So he was approached to look into this case as well, but he declined to look into it. Further rumors started going around town that Ambrose Small was in hiding for some reason or had disappeared on his own. Then as the months and years wore on, people started to suspect that someone probably murdered Ambrose Small. And actually, his disappearance became a joke of sorts. So in the States, you know, Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance is like a big thing, and it's also a big joke. Okay. In Canada, he was like our Ambrose Small. It became a big joke. If you were digging if you were digging a hole at all or anything like that, or renovating a building, people would ask you if you were looking for Ambrose Small. Just give me 1 second, guys. Sorry, guys, I just had to stretch my leg there for a second. So in 1923, the Supreme Court of Ontario declared Ambrose officially dead, right? It had been it was actually shorter than 7 years, it was only 4 years, and they declared him officially dead, mostly because nobody had heard from him. And his will then was executed, and oddly enough, it was Teresa that was the sole person entitled to his estate. He didn't leave any reparations for his sisters at all. And of course, this angered his sisters, and we'll get into that. In 1960, the case was officially closed by the Toronto police. So it is officially closed, but many, many questions still remain. So with that, guys, we're going to get into some of the theories. There are, of course, 4 main theories from that time, and then there's some sub-theories we have to get into too. So, first theory is suicide. This seems highly unlikely. First of all, this was a man who loved life and loved money and loved gambling. He had just made a huge deal that had made him a millionaire. He was already like a millionaire, but it gave him even more money. And we know he loves money. It also seems highly unlikely that he would commit suicide before that the extra $700,000 would come in. He seems to love ladies. He seems to love all the fine things in life. There was no indication that he was a man looking to commit suicide. It's possible that if he thought people were out to get him, he did away with himself anyway. But like I said, guys, you saw his picture and you heard his description. He's fairly distinguishable. So it seems very unlikely that he committed suicide and no one ever found his body. It's possible. I guess he could have buried himself alive, I guess, or put himself into some room or some part of a building nobody ever went into. But it seems that if that were true, at some point in time, his body would have shown up. It's possible he drowned himself in the Humber River. It's very hard to drown yourself. It's possible he did that, and maybe his body floated out to one of the lakes or something. I don't know. I don't even know where the Humber River leads to. I'm just saying this is a highly unlikely theory, but it was one of the theories at the time that Ambrose maybe committed suicide. Number 2 was that there was an accident. Maybe it really was true that Ambrose Small was hit by a car, could have been in the States, could have been in Canada, and had amnesia and had no idea who he was. Like I said, remember there was the guy in the States that claimed to be Jim Doty, but was able to point to Ambrose Small's picture. I think it was Ambrose Small's picture. He was able to pick himself out. Just remember the name Jim Doty. We're going to get into that. It's possible. It's also possible that someone killed him in an accident, like maybe a car accident, and then they panicked because they thought they'd get charged, so they dumped his body, say, in the ravine or someplace else. This really does not seem likely because Yonge Street is a pretty highly traveled street, guys. So if there was a car accident on it, it's highly unlikely the accident wouldn't have been reported. And it's also highly unlikely that someone would be able to cover it up easily. But who's to say for sure? It could have been an accident. Maybe someone accidentally killed him, or maybe he was involved in some type of accident and had no idea what was going on, or maybe he accidentally killed himself. It just doesn't make a lot of sense, but maybe he was so disfigured that nobody could tell he was Ambrose Small. I don't know. Number 3, and this was a main theory for quite a while, was that he skipped town for some reason. Maybe he met another woman that he had more compatibility with and that he fell in love with, and in order not to scandalize Teresa, because remember, divorces were huge scandals at that time, and in order not to shame her, he just up and disappeared. He knew a lot of different people, guys, and he knew some shady people. So it's within the realm of possibility that he could get himself a new identity. It's also within the realm of possibility that he could alter his looks. All he'd have to do was shave the mustache, maybe not wear the hat, dye the hair a different color. Nobody would know who he was. I mean, his picture was splashed everywhere, and for no one to have concretely seen him, it doesn't seem likely. It also doesn't seem likely that he would ever leave that much money. This man loves money, and nobody touched that money. So it seems very unlikely, unless he had millions that he had stacked up through his gambling winnings and never told anybody about and decided he was just going to leave that money to Teresa. It just doesn't seem possible that this was a man that would run away. But you can never say for sure. And of course, the fourth theory, guys, murder. Did someone murder him? Ambrose Small had a lot of enemies, guys. He had an awful lot of enemies. There's no way around that. He was not viewed as that great of a guy by a lot of people. Some people thought he was. Most other people saw him as unscrupulous, a liar, hard-nosed, shrewd, the type of guy who would screw you over. So who's to say that one of his former employees didn't do it? Mr. Shepherd. I mean, there's some ill will there. He eventually buys back the place that he left, and then he fires you. There's got to be some bad blood there. There is no indication that Mr. Shepherd was even around or knew anything about it. But I'm just saying, who's to say he didn't? Who's to say one of his various mistresses, maybe they didn't do it. Maybe they found deeply in love with him. And, you know, he was just in it for the good time. Maybe he got one of them pregnant and he made them have an abortion. Maybe, you know, they could have been like, oh, this will be my cash cow. And then, you know, maybe they're forced into abortion. Maybe the abortion was botched. Who's to say it wasn't one of his various mistresses getting revenge on him somehow? There are a lot of different theories surrounding the murder theory. And to be honest with you guys, murder seems the most likely theory. But there are three main people, three main suspects, if you will. Okay, so the first is the mob. Okay, before you guys poo-poo this, there is some evidence that it's a possibility that the mob could have been involved in his disappearance. So just hold on. So, like we know, he was an illegal bookie when he was younger, guys. He was known for, allegedly, fixing bets. He knew the New York syndicate and the Montreal syndicate, and we're well aware that the mob is it's fairly proliferate, let's just say, in Montreal and in New York. It's well known. So if he's doing some shady deals, and it's possible the mob could have been involved. Okay. It's also possible that when he wrested the control of the syndicates, the booking syndicates in New York and Montreal, we know that mobsters like to have their hands in show business. It's possible they got mad because of that. It's possible he crossed the mob at some point in time. It didn't seem like he was concerned about anything when he disappeared, but he was also a man who minded his own business. Maybe he just didn't tell anybody. Maybe he thought it would put other people in danger. Who's to say for sure? So could he have just run afoul of the mob and they got rid of him? They did it to Jimmy Hoffa, allegedly. So who's to say for sure? Now, according to documents, police actually intercepted a wire being sent to a store owner in New York from Niagara Falls, Ontario. So I would guess the person from Ontario was sending it to Niagara Falls in the States. And this wire said, quote, "Hold Small until tomorrow morning. Don't let him go under any circumstances," end quote. And it was signed SH. Of course, we know that the mob is well known for using monikers or false names, guys. We know this. They love their aliases, of course. They don't want to be found out. And it is also known that when they get rid of somebody or take care of somebody, it's well known that unless they're trying to send a message to somebody else within their own group, to a certain person or to another mafia rival mob, unless they're looking to send a message, they're going to do this quickly, efficiently, and professionally. If you're taken care of by the mob and they don't want you to be found, you're not going to be found. So they would have the means to be able to get rid of him without people knowing. It could have, of course, been someone else entirely that did this. But anyway, George J. Soucy's report that he saw Ambrose being held in that speeding car on Yonge Street also gives us pause to think. Could somebody have kidnapped Ambrose Small and then Mr. Soucy saw them speed off? And of course, maybe he didn't get the license plate or the car wasn't instantly identifiable to him. Remember, this is 1919, guys. Not a lot of people have cars at this point in time. Maybe it just wasn't, maybe he wasn't good at describing it. I don't know. It was also nighttime. It was dark. So who's to say for sure what he saw? But could the mob have kidnapped Ambrose Small at that point in time? There's also Alfred Elson's report that 4 men were burying something heavy in the ravine dump site. Rosedale ravine dump site. Could that have been Ambrose Small's body? A lot of people said torso, to be exact. Could they have been burying it? Like I said, police did look into the dump and they did look into these tips. But I don't know how far they dug into the dump, like how deep down and how much of it they actually looked into. I don't know for sure. Detective Mitchell did actually go to New York for 5 days to investigate these wires and these messages. But he came up with nothing. The mob is good at covering up their tracks, guys. So who can say for sure? Who can say for absolute certainty? There is also this, just to leave you on that. There's also this. The lawyer who defended Frank and Jesse James, yeah, like the famous outlaws, Frank and Jesse James, the James gang, in New York, actually received several letters in the months after Ambrose's disappearance. The letters said Ambrose was, quote, being held by gangsters, end quote. And they were signed by, quote, BB friend, some type of alias. But these letters stopped suddenly and suspiciously, okay? Without anybody ever being able to find out who this BB friend was. Maybe the mob took care of him too. Who's to say for sure? Regardless, the lawyer had these letters, but they stopped suddenly without further information coming forward. I'm just saying. Who's to say for sure? So the second theory, Ambrose's wife, Teresa. You guys probably were already a little suspicious of her. Let's just say there wasn't a lot of love between them. Maybe she really was upset that her husband was having all these trysts. It did make her look... Well, it actually made her look more pious, right? The long-suffering wife. And she was trying to do everything she could to avoid a scandal. She knew it was going to be scandalous when the disappearance came out, right? Because notification of his affairs would end up in papers. You know, people are going to talk, especially at that point in time. So is it possible that it was his wife that did this? I mean, she loves money just as much as Ambrose does. So is it possible she kind of just wanted her husband out of the way, knowing that she was the sole inheritor of his estate? Was it possible that she got rid of him so she could have all the money to herself? Now, I mean, this didn't really help Teresa any too much, let's just say. Could she have planned it with, and you remember that there were people that said she had a lover. Could she and her lover have planned it so that Ambrose could be declared legally dead and she could marry him? She never did remarry though, guys, just to let you know. And actually, this case brought her a lot of notoriety to the point where she had to actually go into semi-retirement to avoid all the scandalous nature of it. Did she... Why did it take her 2 weeks, though, to report her husband is missing? She gave the description that she thought he was with another woman. Was he known to leave for 2-week time stretches though? How did she not get suspicious? I know she called some of the associates, but how in all that time with nobody seeing her husband? And you know, if he was in Canada, people would have seen him. He would have had business associates in the States too. Why is it that she waited 2 weeks to report him missing? Nobody else is saying they saw him. Why? Was it because she was covering up what she did? It's possible. Many people, like I said, did suspect it was Teresa, especially Ambrose's 2 sisters, who once their brother disappeared, were not getting his financial support anymore. Women weren't really known to work at this point in time, guys, so that's likely why. If your father died and you were a spinster, it would fall on your brother, or sometimes your brothers-in-law to take care of you. So they were pretty mad that their cash flow had stopped coming in. And they did love their brother, guys. They did describe him as their hero. So they did actually want to find out what happened to their brother. But it's you know, they're a little mad. They were also very surprised that he made no provisions for them in his will. This was a will that Teresa herself produced. So who's to say she didn't forge it? Or who's to say she didn't have somebody, maybe Mr. Flock, forge it? Who's to say that Mr. Flock and she weren't working together so they could both have the money? There's no evidence of it. I'm just saying, who's to say for sure? So why no provisions for his sisters in the will? That doesn't seem likely either, but who's to say for sure? Florence and Gertrude, they were actually the sisters' names, believe Teresa planned the murder and did it herself, or that she had another person help her, like Mr. Flock, like Mr. Shepherd, like any one of these various people. Wouldn't that have been a fine thing? Maybe her lover was actually Mr. Shepherd. There's no evidence of it, but maybe her lover was actually Mr. Shepherd, and this was going to be another revenge thing. I mean, he cheated on her the whole time. Wouldn't it be great if she cheated on him with one of his arch enemies, and that way they both got revenge on him? I'm just saying, isn't it? That's a story. But like I said, who's to say for sure, guys? Who's to say for sure? They were very, very, very upset with her, and due to the fact that there was no evidence, no crime scene, and no body, I mean, there's not really much the police could do. So they would have to declare him legally dead. This can't be a case for corpus delicti, guys. I know cases can be tried without bodies. I don't think at that point in time they did it, because you have to have a major bloodletting scene. There has to be a crime scene where you can see blood, and of course there was no blood left behind. There has to be a major a major bloodletting event. If there isn't one, no one can say for sure that this person is dead. A lot of the times, like with Natalie Holloway, they were able to declare her legally dead 7 years later because nobody had seen or heard from her. There was no crime scene, there was no body, but they were able to do that, right? Jimmy Hoffa, same deal. They're declared legally dead after a certain amount of time. Usually it's 7 years, but this was longer ago in history, so I can't be certain on that. There was no major bloodletting event, so there's no way that they could tell for sure that he had been murdered. There was no evidence at all. So the sisters actually believed that the police were helping Teresa cover this up. Maybe they thought one of her lovers was a police officer. I don't know. They just had it in their head that she was having an affair. So they figured the police had covered it up for her, maybe to get a cut of the money. Who's to say for sure? And they hired their own PI. Now, the guy they hired, from what I can tell, was not an actual PI. He's a guy named Pat Sullivan, and he actually knew them from the place they were living in. He was also somebody that lived at that place. It seems like it was a boarding house of sorts. He was actually a publisher. Sorry, guys. he was a publisher of a weekly tabloid in Toronto. I think it was called The Thunderer. And he roomed with them, like I said. So he's the publisher of a tabloid magazine, guys. And he has absolutely no credentials. He's in no way a detective, but he claims to have done a bunch of sleuthing work for them. And they started a huge smear campaign on Teresa because of this. Sullivan, quote, found out that Teresa's personal maid at the time of the disappearance had been committed to Whitby Asylum after the disappearance, end quote. According to the maid, who he claimed he talked to, she saw Teresa, quote, standing over a spot, end quote, on her cellar floor at 2 a.m. on the morning of the 3rd, right? The early morning of the 3rd. Now, who cares if and that she was saying her rosary while kneeling over this spot? Now, maybe she was just praying. I don't know. Maybe the maid assumed this was the crime scene. There's no blood, though. Maybe she assumed Teresa had buried her husband there, but there was no movement of anything. Like, the cellar floor was still there. It wasn't disturbed in any way. Regardless, this PI claimed to have found this woman who was put in an asylum after this. And he also, he claims that what she said made them believe it was Teresa that had done this. This was apparently his proof that she had killed Ambrose. He also claimed to have somehow gotten a confession from Teresa herself to being the murderer of Ambrose Small. He said he had come about this confession because it had, quote, fallen into his hands by strange and devious means, end quote. He never said what they were. There were several lawsuits, as you guys can imagine, involved in this because the sisters wanted a piece of Ambrose's estate. They thought it was owed to them. Like I said, it was Teresa who produced the will that claimed that he left everything in Teresa, completely leaving the sisters out. But once again, that's kind of shady too. Who can say for sure that is true? Now, it's possible. I mean, most of the time, guys, if your spouse dies and you're still alive, you become the person that inherits everything. And then when you pass on, other people will. It seems like it's just part of the time. And of course he probably would have talked to Teresa and said, well, still take care of my sisters. Now that's on Teresa that she decided not to do it, but I'm just saying for the most part, that's what happens. But regardless, the sisters wanted their piece, and this Mr. Sullivan appeared to have deeply wanted it for them. He probably was just in it because he figured he could get some money from it, but you know what I mean. So on April 29th of 1924, the will was finally officially completely settled. A judge decided each sister would get the interest on $100,000. That's it. Teresa claimed she would have given this to them anyway. They didn't have to pull all these stunts, but regardless, it was a firm judgment. So be that as it may, or do with that what you will, I guess, guys. Due to their suspicions, like I said before, this was notorious. Teresa entered into a state of notoriety. It kind of ruined her life, guys. And she went into semi-retirement and kind of went into hiding. She became a little bit reclusive after this because she didn't want people bringing it up and accusing her. And she actually died on October 14th of 1935. Now, her will left everything to various people, and the remainder of it, she left various sums of money to people that she had been generous with in life. She was actually a really generous woman in life. So there were various beneficiaries, but the main one seems like it was the Roman Catholic Church. Any residual interests made on the money that was still in holding was supposed to go to the Roman Catholic Church. And of course, this put the sisters and Pat Sullivan all up in arms again. They were really mad. They thought that the residuals of her estate should go to them, even though half of this estate was actually Teresa's own money, if you guys will remember. And a lot of the money that was made by Ambrose was made when the two of them were married together. But I'm just saying they were in uproar about this again. And so Pat Sullivan started this smear campaign again. And now he was after the Catholic Church. He claims, that in the days before Ambrose's disappearance, a note had been left on the St. Joseph's Convent. I'm going to guess Teresa must have went there quite often. And the note said, quote, "Your prayers are required for the recovery of Ambrose J. Small, who is now dangerously ill," end quote. So these were in the days before he disappeared. I don't think there's any evidence of this note though, guys. He just claims that it happened. I don't know if he's ever actually seen this note. And he demanded that the church tell him who left it. Okay, if it's a note left on the door, and it wasn't signed, I'm not sure how anybody in a church is supposed to know. And nobody's ever produced this note. Could have existed. I'm not saying it didn't, but I'm just saying, where's the proof that it did? He went so far, this Mr. Sullivan went so far, as to actually write to the Pope and try to get the Pope to look into the case. And of course, the Pope declined. He had other things to do. So this sent Mr. Sullivan on a smear campaign of the Catholic Church, and he started blasting them in his weekly tabloid. Yeah, I'm serious. All this stuff. This guy was a money grubber, man. He's not even a real PI. That just makes it even funnier. But I mean, it's sad that Ambrose has disappeared and that everybody's getting dragged into all these things, but that is a funny element of it. So at this point in time, oh, it's Lola. Hi, Lola. At this point in time, at this point in time, there wasn't much left with regards to money anyway. The legal proceedings had actually taken a huge chunk of what was left in the estate, guys. And whatever was left after it was doled out to the various beneficiaries, let's just say there wasn't much. Eventually, the will was declared unworkable and was actually left up to probate in the courts. And that dragged on for years and years and years, guys. I don't want to call it bankrupt, but it was vastly depleted. There was no millions left in it. I don't even know if there was thousands left in it. So it was eventually declared unworkable. So number 3. This is the name I wanted you guys to remember. A man named James Jack, sometimes also known as John Doty. D-O-U-G-H-T-Y, Doty. So this guy is really the most likely candidate, guys. And we're going to get into it. Doty was Ambrose Small's personal secretary for actually 18 years. Though he worked for a millionaire, apparently Ambrose only paid him $45 a week. That's the equivalent to $1,578 in today's money. A week, guys. That seems like a lot to me, or at least fair to me. But because Ambrose was a millionaire, James Doty thought that he should be paid more. And he often complained about how small his salary was to anybody that would listen to him. In January of 1920, Doty, who, like I said, is referred to by James, Jim, and Jack. Remember, the man who had amnesia in the States claimed his name was Jim Doty. I'm just saying. It could have been a common name anyway, guys, but I'm just saying. It's kind of suspicious. He also disappeared. He was transferred to the Trans-Canada Theatres in Montreal as part of the deal. So he was transferred to Montreal as part of the deal for the theaters that was made with Ambrose Small for the sale of the theaters. And police, I'm pretty sure it was after Jim Doty disappeared, after he didn't end up in Montreal. Police, at some point in time, decided to open Ambrose Small's safety deposit vault. This would be at Dominion Bank, as far as I know as well. And they found that $105,000 in bonds was missing. This would be worth about $1,578,000 plus change today. So it's over $1 million in bonds is missing from the vault. Now, James Doty was actually, he had power of attorney over the vault, guys. So he was legally able to come and go and visit that vault and take whatever he wanted or put in whatever he wanted from that vault, guys. He legally had power of attorney over the vault. So he was able to do that. But where were the missing bonds? And I don't think Teresa knew about this either. At this point, police suspected that he had taken or embezzled the money and done a runner. You know, so they were suspicious of him. You got a missing man. And then a month later, his personal secretary goes missing. And so does $105,000 worth of bonds. They really want to talk to this guy. So they started looking around for him. And they actually located him in December of 1920 at a logging camp in Oregon. Interesting place to end up. So they, of course, extradited him immediately back to Toronto. And Mr. Doty did, once they got back to Toronto, he did immediately take them, the police, to the place where he had hidden the bonds, or where the bonds were hidden, because we're going to get into a strange story about this. Just remember, he immediately took the police there. So he was, of course, arraigned on charges of theft and conspiracy to kidnap at this point in time. At trial, Doty claimed that he was just holding the bonds for Mr. Small. And Ambrose's disappearance left him holding the bag, so to speak. And though he could have taken them to the vault at any point in time. Do you see what I mean, guys? Even after Ambrose disappeared, right? Because they were working under the theory for that initial 2 weeks that Ambrose was just either off on business or visiting with one of his lady friends. So he had those 2 weeks that he could have put the money into the vault and didn't. But regardless, he claimed before he was able to put them in the vault, for some reason, he was stopped for some reason. He had to board the train to Montreal. And somehow he had no time to deposit these bonds for whatever reasons. So he then claimed he gave the bonds to his sister to deposit in a different safety deposit box. It's just known as the package. He gave his sister this package, and ostensibly at that point in time, she didn't know what was in the package. So she just put it away and forgot about it. So James came back to Toronto from Montreal on December 21st. If you think about it, before he disappeared, he had quite a few weeks to have put these bonds into a vault. He had at least 2 weeks before people even knew Ambrose was missing. And he had a few weeks before police were looking into the vault anyway. So why is it that he had no way to put them in the vault, number one? But number two, if he was back in Toronto on a couple occasions, why didn't he do it then? It's very, very fishy. Oh, Lola's coming up to visit us. Hi, Lola. Hi, baby. It's very fishy to me. So like I said, he came back from Montreal on December 21st, and then again on the weekend of December 27th and 28th. He finally told his sister what was in the package. And she then moved the bonds. Once again, nobody's putting them in a vault. She then moved the bonds to a hiding spot under the floorboards of her attic. Okay. They were moved then again by another one of James Doty's brothers into the walls in the attic, a layer between the walls in the attic. But yet it was Mr. Doty that was able to tell police exactly where the bonds were. This seems suspicious because if police were able to track that other wire, it seems like he must have been in contact with his brother if that was something that really happened, if it was true that the brother hid them. And why hide them in the attic to begin with? Put them in the vault. You had power of attorney. That's crazy. And then he just disappears. Anyway. So James claimed he disappeared because he figured he would be blamed for Ambrose's disappearance. Ambrose disappeared before police went into the vault and knew he had taken away this money. But I guess he figured he would be blamed because he griped about the salary. And there's other reasons we're going to get into. But he also maybe thought that they would think he was an embezzler. So he just disappeared. The investigation was already underway. I don't know. I don't get it. But this is his way of thinking. So at his trial, several employees of the Opera House actually said Doty had come to them with plans to kidnap Ambrose on more than one occasion. And probably hold him for ransom, I would assume. Maybe $105,000 worth of bonds ransom. But regardless, he came to them with these kidnap plots, and of course nobody took part in them, on a couple occasions. And it was again reiterated in trial that he often complained about his small salary. Doty's lawyers reminded the court that he did have power of attorney over the vault, and as such, he could take what he wanted. They also pointed out that none of the bonds had been cashed. None of them were actually cashed, guys. They were just hidden. They were never cashed. And that because they hadn't been, and that he did lead police directly to where they were, I should say. But because none of them were cashed, it couldn't be considered a theft, because though he had the bonds in his possession, in his sister's possession really, they couldn't be cashed at all. That's what they claimed. So there was no theft. Regardless, the jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 6 years in Portsmouth Penitentiary. Ooh, looks like Lola needs to go back outside. Okay, girl, just a minute. Go back outside. There you go, baby. So regardless, that's what they did. He served about 4 years of his original sentence, and then went into business, some sort of business in East Toronto. Seems like he lived the rest of his life in a kind of obscurity. Not much pops up about him after that. He died August 12th, 1949, without ever shedding any more light on Ambrose Small's case. He either never talked about it or he had nothing to add. If he had killed him, he took the secret to the grave. If he and Teresa had worked together to kill him, they both took the secret to the grave. But he is the most likely suspect, guys. He definitely had the motive. He definitely would have had the means. He definitely would have had the opportunity. I'm just saying. Regardless, no one can say with 100% certainty what actually happened to Ambrose Small, guys. Did he commit suicide? Highly unlikely. Was he in an accident and had amnesia? Also highly unlikely. His face was splashed all over the place. He was so fairly well known, guys. He was so well known, especially in Canada, but a lot of the states knew him fairly well too. He was even well known over in Europe, right? So it seems unlikely that unless he was highly disfigured by an accident that no one would ever notice him. Seems unlikely. He was pretty distinctive looking. Could he have just run away and started a new life? That's possible. Once again, highly suspect that nobody in the rest of the amount of time that he lived, that nobody would be able to pinpoint him as Ambrose Small unless he picked a really obscure place to live in that nobody would have known him. Who can say for sure? Or was he murdered? And if he was murdered, who did it? Was it the mob? Was it Teresa? Was it James Doty? Was it a different employee? Was it somebody he screwed over in the business? Was it a former lover? Was it the parents of a former lover? Was it one of the horse racing jockeys? Who can say for sure? That's why I said leave me some comments, guys. Let me know. What do you think happened to Ambrose Small 102 years ago? Let me know down below. I'd really love to know your thoughts on this one. So hopefully you guys will have a great next week, and I will see you later. Bye for now, guys.